The first thing I noticed was that the pod wasn't trying to run, which immediately made me suspicious, because in my experience anything that doesn't run is either broken, bait, or confident enough to make you regret approaching it. I leaned back in my chair, boots resting against the console, watching the drift pattern stabilize on my screen like it had somewhere better to be but decided to wait for me out of politeness. That alone irritated me. Space is many things: cold, empty, occasionally explosive, but polite isn't one of them. All right, I muttered, flicking a switch that didn't really need flicking but made me feel like I was doing something important. Either you're the easiest job I've ever had or I'm about to die in a very embarrassing way. The ship didn't respond because it never does when I try to be dramatic. I adjusted the approach vector manually because autopilot tends to assume I value safety over curiosity, which is an unfair accusation but not entirely inaccurate. The pod rotated slowly as I closed in, its surface unmarred, no scorch marks, no signs of forced ejection. Clean, too clean. Even rich people don't eject in pristine pods unless something went very right or very wrong. Let's hope you're the very right kind, I said, already knowing hope had very little to do with it. Docking clamps locked with a satisfying thud that echoed through the hull, and for a moment everything went quiet in that way that makes your thoughts louder than they should be. I grabbed my sidearm out of habit not because I expected trouble, but because I've learned the universe appreciates irony, and I prefer not to contribute to it. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and there she was, sitting inside like she'd been waiting for a late ride rather than drifting alone in the middle of nowhere. At first glance, she looked human enough to make my brain relax, which lasted about half a second before the details corrected that assumption. Her ears were long, elegantly tapering past her hair, not exaggerated, not grotesque, just different enough to make the rest of her feel slightly unreal, like a memory that didn't belong to me. Her eyes tracked me with a calmness that immediately made me check behind me, just in case there was someone more important she should have been looking at. "Hi," I said, because years of training and experience have prepared me to say exactly that in critical moments. She tilted her head slightly, studying me in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation. "You're later than expected." I blinked. "That's impressive," I replied, stepping inside. "Most people start with 'help me' or 'please don't shoot.' You went straight to scheduling complaints." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest she understood the concept. "I didn't think either would be necessary." "Confident," I said, gesturing toward the open space of my ship. "Or delusional, jury is still out." "I suppose that depends on you," she answered, standing up with an ease that made me subtly tighten my grip on the sidearm. "Let's not make this complicated," I said, motioning for her to step forward. "You come with me, I deliver you, I get paid, and we both pretend this was a very boring day." She stepped out of the pod without hesitation, which somehow made it worse. Most captives hesitate. It's practically tradition. She moved like she was choosing to cooperate, not being forced to, and that distinction made the air feel heavier. "And what do you want?" she asked. I frowned. "What do I want?" "Yes," she said, as if the question were perfectly reasonable, "beyond the transaction." I snorted, guiding her toward the restraint field near the wall. "I want the transaction. That's the whole point of transactions. They save us from conversations like this." She allowed the field to activate around her wrists, glancing at it briefly before looking back at me. "You could have said credits." "I could have," I admitted, checking the field's strength. "But I've had enough jobs go wrong that I've learned not to get emotionally attached to numbers I haven't been paid yet." "That suggests experience," she said. "That suggests survival," I corrected, stepping back. "And a healthy distrust of anything that looks too easy." Her gaze lingered on me, thoughtful in a way that made me uncomfortable, like she was assembling pieces I hadn't realized I'd dropped. "And do I look easy to you?" I hesitated just long enough to be honest. "No," I said, "you look like paperwork, the complicated kind." That earned a real smile, brief but unmistakable. "Then perhaps you should reconsider delivering me." I laughed, because it felt like the appropriate response to a bad idea. "Right. I'll just ignore my contract, anger people who can afford better ships than mine, and take advice from someone I found floating in a box." "When you say it like that, it does sound unwise," she admitted. "Fortunately, I can offer something better than your contract." Everyone says that, I replied, leaning against the console, usually right before things explode. And do they usually explain how your life could change? She asked. They usually explain how I'm special, I said dryly, which is how I know they're lying. I won't tell you that you're special, she said. I will tell you that you're in a position to choose differently. I rubbed my face, already tired of this conversation. Look, I don't need a life lesson, I need a smooth delivery and a full payment, that's it. And after that, she pressed. After that, I said, I find another job and try not to die doing it, it's a simple system. She watched me for a moment, then nodded slowly as if confirming something to herself. Yes, she said softly, it is simple. Good, I replied, glad we agree. I didn't say it was sufficient. I sighed, pushing off the console and heading back toward the cockpit. Stay right there, I called over my shoulder. Try not to escape, overthrow anything, or convince me to ruin my life. I've got a schedule to keep. As you wish, she said, her voice calm, almost amused. I slid into the pilot's seat and pulled up the navigation display. The route blinked steadily, clear and uncomplicated, leading straight to a payout that suddenly felt smaller than it had an hour ago. I stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, then shook my head. Routine job, I muttered. Easy credits. Behind me, I could feel her presence without hearing her move, like a question waiting patiently for an answer I hadn't agreed to give. And for the first time in a long while, I had the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that the job had already changed, and I just hadn't caught up to it yet. I kept the course steady for a while, mostly because changing it too early would make me look like I was already considering her offer, and I refused to look predictable in my own ship. The stars slid across the viewport like they had better things to do than watch my poor decision-making process. Behind me, she remained quiet long enough that I almost believed she'd decided to cooperate fully and become the easiest passenger I'd ever transported. That illusion lasted about 3 minutes. You're pretending not to think about it, she said. I'm pretending to enjoy the silence, I replied. It's a rare luxury. That's not the same thing. It is if you try hard enough. I heard the faint hum of the restraint field as she shifted slightly. Not struggling, just adjusting, like someone moving to a more comfortable position during a long trip. That bothered me more than if she'd tried to escape. You didn't ask my name, she said. That's because names make things personal, I answered. And personal things complicate business. You've already made it personal. I glanced over my shoulder. How exactly? You're still talking to me. I stared at her for a second, then nodded slowly. Fair point. All right, mysterious person with suspiciously long ears, do you have a name that will improve this situation? Lyris. Lyris, I repeated. Sounds expensive. She tilted her head again, that same thoughtful motion. What does that mean? It means people with names like that usually belong to places with carpets that cost more than my ship. Your ship looks well maintained. That's because I talk to it nicely, I said, unlike most people I transport. For a moment, she watched me with what I suspected was amusement. I didn't like that I couldn't always tell with her. Humans are easy, eyebrows go up, lips move, everyone follows predictable patterns. She was close enough to human to confuse my instincts, but different enough to make them unreliable. You're not afraid of me, she said. I'm afraid of a lot of things, I replied. Running out of fuel, bad contracts, explosive decompression during lunch, you specifically still deciding, that's honest, don't get used to it. I turned back to the navigation panel, pretending to review the route even though I already knew every turn. She let the silence stretch again, which I was beginning to suspect was a strategy. People talk when silence gets uncomfortable. Unfortunately for her, I've spent weeks alone in this cockpit. Silence and I are practically roommates. You're taking the slower corridor, she said eventually. I frowned. You memorized my route already. I noticed the star patterns, she replied calmly. It avoids patrol zones. That's called professional paranoia. It also suggests you don't fully trust the people paying you. I laughed under my breath. Lyris, I don't fully trust gravity. Trust is expensive. That makes you useful. That makes me alive. She leaned slightly forward, the restraint field shimmering faintly as it adjusted. Tell me something. If you knew delivering me would cause more problems than keeping me, what would you do? I'd complain loudly and then probably still do the job, I said. I have a reputation for disappointing heroic expectations. That's unfortunate. For who? For you. I leaned back in the seat and looked at her again. You're very calm for someone technically captured. You're very casual for someone transporting someone important. Important people don't usually come in pods without security. She smiled faintly. They do when security becomes the problem. Well, I said, raising a finger, that's exactly the kind of sentence that leads to me accidentally getting involved in something complicated. You're already involved? Denial is a powerful coping strategy. She considered that like it might be an academic concept worth studying. You joke a lot. People get nervous when things are quiet, I said. Jokes fill the gaps. Are you nervous now? I paused, thinking about that. Outside the ship, space remained endlessly calm, which is usually when something unpleasant decides to arrive. A little, I admitted, but mostly curious. That's good. That's dangerous. Yes, she said simply. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. You know what bothers me? Many things, I imagine. You're not wrong, I said. But right now it's the fact that you're acting like this is a conversation between partners instead of a negotiation between a pilot and his cargo. Because it could be, there it is again, I muttered. The offer, she didn't deny it. Help me return and your life changes. You keep saying that like it's a positive thing. It is. Every time my life has changed, it involved explosions. She actually laughed softly at that, and it caught me off guard enough that I almost missed the faint signal flicker on my console. I leaned forward immediately, pulling up the sensor display. A distant echo pulsed at the edge of range, weak but definitely not random background noise. What is it? She asked. Probably nothing, I said automatically, which is pilot language for something that might become a problem soon. You're lying again. Correct, I said, magnifying the scan, but in a comforting way. Another signal appeared, then faded, like someone testing the darkness to see who was watching. My fingers tapped the controls, adjusting the ship's output signature. Could be patrol, I said. Could be someone else with a boring day. And if it's not, then I get to file a complaint with the universe. I noticed she was watching the display now, eyes focused in a way that suggested recognition. You know something, I said. I know possibilities, she replied. Those signals related to you? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I groaned. Of course they are, why wouldn't they be? You're still in control of the situation, she said calmly. I was in control when my biggest problem was bad coffee. That was never your biggest problem. I leaned back slowly, looking between the signals and her. Lyris, I said, if ships start showing up because of you, my day is officially ruined. They won't attack yet, she said. Yet is not a comforting word. It's an honest one. I exhaled and stared at the route again. Straight ahead was the job I signed up for. Slightly off course was the unknown she kept offering like it came with a warranty. You know, I said, most passengers just complain about the temperature. She smiled faintly. I can start if it makes you feel better. Please don't, I replied. I'm already reconsidering my career choices. Outside, the signals pulsed again, a little stronger this time, and the ship hummed quietly as if it also realized this trip was no longer routine. The signals didn't fade this time, which I took personally, because I prefer my problems distant and hypothetical. I leaned forward, adjusting the scan range, watching as the faint echoes sharpened into something with intent. One ship became two, then three, each holding just far enough back to pretend they weren't interested in me, which was the kind of politeness that usually ends with weapons fire. Well, I said, this is new. They've found us sooner than expected, Lyris replied. Us, I repeated. I liked it better when it was just me making questionable decisions. You've already made one. Technically, I'm still thinking about it. Your course says otherwise? I glanced at the navigation display, then frowned. The line wasn't as straight as it used to be, just a slight deviation, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, which unfortunately I did. That's a rounding error, I said. You adjusted it 3 minutes ago. That was experimental flying. She smiled faintly. Of course. Another pulse hit the sensors, stronger this time, and a warning tone chimed softly like it was trying not to panic me. All right, I muttered, experimental flying might become necessary. They won't wait much longer, she said. Good, I replied. I hate being kept in suspense. I pushed a series of controls, dampening the ship's signature while rerouting power to the engines. The hull vibrated slightly in response, like it had opinions about my choices but decided to trust me anyway. Poor judgment on its part. Last chance, I said, glancing back at her. You want to tell me exactly how bad this is? She met my gaze, calm as ever. If they take me, I won't survive. That's bad, I said. I was hoping for something more optimistic. If you deliver me, you'll be paid, she continued. If you help me, you'll be remembered. I prefer being paid, I said. It's quieter and safer, usually. Another signal flared, closer now, no longer pretending. I could almost feel their sensors brushing against my hull, curious, patient. You know, I said slowly, this was supposed to be a simple job. It still can be, she replied. No, I said, shaking my head. Simple left about 10 minutes ago. I leaned back, staring at the stars ahead, then at the 3 faint signatures behind us. Straight line forward, clean delivery, someone else's problem. Slight turn to the left, unknown consequences, definitely my problem. Do you ever get the feeling, I said, that your life is just a series of increasingly bad decisions stacked on top of each other? Often, she said. The difference is whether you choose them. I huffed a quiet laugh. I was afraid you'd say something like that. The console beeped again, sharper this time, less polite. All right, I said, sitting up. I'm going to do something stupid. I assumed you would. Comforting, I muttered. My hand hovered over the navigation controls for a second longer than necessary. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what it meant. Contracts broken, new enemies, a future that definitely didn't include quiet jobs and predictable paychecks. Just so we're clear, I said, if this goes badly, I'm blaming you. That's fair, she said, and if it goes well, then you won't need to blame anyone. Suspiciously optimistic, I murmured. I exhaled, then pushed the controls. The ship shifted course. Not dramatically, not enough to scream defiance, but enough to slip out of the path I'd been following. The navigation line bent, subtle but undeniable, and for a moment everything felt very quiet again, like the universe was taking a breath. Behind us, the signals reacted instantly. Well, I said, they noticed. They would, Lyris replied. Of course they would. The warning tones sharpened, the distant ships adjusting their vectors, no longer pretending anything. I rerouted more power to the engines, the hum deepening as the ship responded. Hold on, I said. I'm restrained, she reminded me. Right, I said. Then emotionally prepare. I pushed the throttle. The stars stretched slightly as we accelerated, the ship cutting through space with more urgency than I usually allowed. The pursuing signals flared brighter, closing the distance with unsettling efficiency. They're faster, I said. They're desperate, she corrected. Great, I muttered. Desperate is always faster. A flicker of something crossed her expression then, subtle but real. Approval, maybe, or relief. You chose, she said quietly. Yeah, I replied. Don't make me regret it. I won't. Everyone says that. I adjusted our trajectory again, weaving slightly, forcing the ships behind us to react. My hands moved automatically now, years of experience turning panic into something more useful. You've done this before, she observed. Running away, I said professionally, and choosing differently? I hesitated just for a second. No, I admitted. That part's new. She nodded like that confirmed something important. The distance between us and the others stabilized, not increasing, not decreasing. A stalemate, temporary but valuable. So, I said, assuming we survive the next few minutes, what exactly did I sign up for? She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd found her, there was no calculation in her gaze.